Assalamu alaikum. I'm Imam Dai Abdullah, the director of LGBT Outreach Program at Muslims for Progressive Values. In this video, we're going to talk about how sexuality was responded to with medicine in various different parts of our history and how that impacted sexual minorities in our communities. Jewish, Christian, and Muslim cultures have been greatly influenced by many other cultures, and that has had a large influence on the understanding of sexual identity, gender identity, and non-heteronormative spaces in their communities. With homosexuality in particular, we see a growing number of Muslims borrowing various different cultural ideologies about the issue and apply it as an Islamic viewpoint. Of course, this includes the medical response to sexual improprieties in the Muslim community in the various historical periods of our community. In the 7th century Jewish communities, sexual improprieties were to be understood in the larger understanding of the place of sex in Judaism. In Judaism, sex is as natural as hunger and thirst. But all of these basic natural inclinations are coming from what the Jews called evil impulse. In order to curb this evil impulse, you needed to have a good impulse. As such, Jews had a lot of ways to curb sexual improprieties. Of course, these beliefs were a combination of what the Jewish people had witnessed in various societies, as well as what they had created for themselves within their religion. For example, the Jewish Talmud talks about sexual relationships between women as being something, quote, what the Egyptians did, unquote. That tells us their understanding of sexual relationships between women, as well as sexual relationships between men, was influenced by their interaction with Egyptian society. So, how would you then look at such sexual impropriety? This answer became the foundation for later considering homosexuality as a mental illness in the 19th and 20th century. In the 7th century, it is not that someone was considered mentally ill, but it was more as if though they were unbalanced. Depending upon which Jewish community we were talking about, there were various views about what this imbalance was and its causes. One Jewish community looked to the causes, what was called, quote, four humors of the body, which were phlegm, blood, yellow bile, and black bile. Some of the sexual improprieties, such as sexual addiction, were not clearly dealt with because the larger culture made room for such improprieties to be normal. For example, when you have a concubinage culture, sexual disorders such as sexual addiction become invincible because if you have 100 women from which to choose from, and you're going to visit 50 of them in one day, chances are no one would accuse you of being sexually addicted because the culture has made it normal for you to be invincible. On the other hand, if you happen to be a transgender person exhibiting sexual ambiguity, it would lead you to be classified as being imbalanced. Similarly, if you are homosexual and you are revealed as such, you would then also be classified as being imbalanced. That is because the general culture institutions did not have a place for where homosexuals or transgender persons could be invincible. Similarly, both Christians and Muslims developed their ideas about sex from the influences of the people around them, as well as their own religions. That means Jewish understanding of sexual improprieties would be later transferred into Christianity and into Islam, combined with the cultures around the time of the birth of Christianity and Islam, respectively. During the Golden Age, individuals experiencing mental illnesses were frequently treated at home by family members first. Such treatment included the cultural treatments that had been inherited and from the various Muslim cultural backgrounds that had come into Islam, such as Persian treatments of imbalances brought by Persian Muslim scholars like Ibn Sina. If those forms of treatment did not work, then the person would receive exorcisms or ritualized treatments from religious leaders. If the person's behavior continued to worsen, the family would take the individual to the state-run mental hospitals for further treatment. These mental hospitals were funded by the state or wealthy individuals. Therefore, treatment was usually free for most patients. Individuals were placed in sex-restricted wards as well as illness-related groupings in order to isolate certain behaviors from others. It did not matter how long the treatment cycle took, for these hospitals were fully equipped institutions that provided proper care through physicians, same-sex nurses and orderlies, medical students, a free pharmacy, as well as a kitchen that prepared specialized dietary meals for treatment. In non-Muslim states, particularly in Europe, mental hospitals did not exist as they did in Muslim states. Quite often, the mentally ill were sent to workhouses or asylums, some associated with monasteries and others associated with charities. In these institutions, treatment for mental illness was not always given, but were more attuned to being warehoused to keep the mentally ill out of public view. If an individual came from a family of means, they would usually receive medical treatment from a physician, but a common cure was not always found. During the earlier part of the modern times, as scientific knowledge increased during the 16th and 17th century Europe, the Judeo-Christian society began to change how they approached and dealt with medical issues as well as mental health in regards to sexual improprieties. For example, homosexuality went from one of a religious viewpoint to one of a medical viewpoint. It in the sense that homosexuals went from being criminals against God to being victims of mental illness. In the 19th and 20th century, the Judeo-Christian world employed several items to medically respond to homosexuality. Some of these things included medical surgeries, behavioral modifications, psychoanalysis, reparative therapy, and sex therapy. On the other hand, the Judeo-Christian world still criminalized homosexuality in the law. For example, in the United States, even though in the earlier 20th century, homosexuality was considered a mental illness, it would take nearly another 100 years to decriminalize homosexuality on a federal basis. Back in the East, the colonial period brought back some of these Judeo-Christian Western ideologies. Due to the stigma associated with mental illness, people in the East, whether in the Jewish, Christian, or Muslim communities, all shared the concept that those who exhibited mentally ill behavior had moral and spiritual weaknesses that could only be corrected through divine intervention. Acknowledgement of mental illness would bring shame and isolation to the individual, as well as their family or tribe. Today, Muslim psychologists and Western psychologists differ greatly on how to look at sexual and gender identities. This has to do with the fact that the Judeo-Christian Western world has moved away from a medical system based on religion to a medical system based upon secular research. Unfortunately, Muslim psychologists are still mixing religion and secular research. In conclusion, we can see how the medical response on sexual improprieties had been greatly influenced by various different cultures, which came in contact with Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and the modern world. Unfortunately, the scientific community and most of the Muslim world refuses to steer their work away from culture and religion. This, unfortunately, has to do with the cultural binary that is based upon heteronormative patriarchy, understanding of sexuality, gender, and everything that is not a male-female equation.